Kim is going to lead us off tonight with some swabbing techniques, and then Adam is going to chime in and give us a little like piccolo extra special info on that. So Kim, take it away.
All right. One of the big things is how often to swab, and that's going to vary a little bit, but at least every time when you put your flute away. So you don't want to be in a situation where you're putting your flute away damp. I happen to produce a lot of condensation when I play, so I often swab between rehearsals as well, like in breaks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a couple different options. I have a preferred one, so I'll show that first and we'll kind of go from there. The most important thing is that when you're using the rod that you use to clean the flute body out in the head joint, you want to make sure that it's either plastic or wood. You don't want to have a metal one. Most of the manufacturers don't have the metal ones at all anymore. But the reason for that is that the metal ones can scratch. So the plastic ones and the wood ones are going to be safer. What I usually do for my students and myself is I just have a plain old white handkerchief. This one's been washed. And that's another thing we'll talk about in a second. So I just pull it through about a thumb's worth or a hand's worth and then flip it around so that it kind of looks like a flying Rapunzel. This is how to remind people what it's supposed to look like. The point of it is to really make sure that you're covering the entire cleaning rod itself with the cloth, so there's no possibility that it can scratch or damage it or catch on anything. I always recommend just holding it. If you've got a really long one, I hold mine at the bottom so that there's no way that it can slip up. If you have a large one like this, then what you do is you take the body of the flute and hold it carefully at the end. There's no keys here, so you can grab it really hard. It's going to be stable and you're not going to have to worry about dropping it. And then I do one halfway through and sort of turn it around. And then I just carefully readjust and go halfway through and pull it out. That's with one of these larger cloths, because if you push too large a cloth through, it can actually get stuck. If it does get stuck, please don't try to pull it out. Take it to your band director or take it to a music store that does flute repairs and they will be able to get it out. Don't use any tools ever. Things can go bad so quickly. So that's this one. The other one I have is one of these, which is smaller and it's stretchy. And with that, you could do the same thing. You kind of loop it through, wrap it around again. This one takes up a lot less space in the instrument, so you can actually push it all the way through if you want to, if that's something that you're more comfortable with. Same with the head joint. You're going to wrap it around the top and you're going to do the head joint. And that works really, really well. There are two other options that are sort of readily available and people see all the time. One of them is this, which is called, there's a couple different makes for them, same sort of basic idea. One's called the flute flag, one's called the flute wand. And this, I use it a lot for my head joint because this part gets up right in the top. And it gets any condensation that's like right on that plate. When you look in, you can see. So for that, I just put it in, spin it around, and then pull it out. This does need to be washed before it's used. I believe it says that on the packaging. If it doesn't, it does need to be washed because it does have a sizing in it that makes it not absorbent. So if you're not having it working, just some dish soap and water, let it dry. Same with the cloths. They're designed to be washed. Please wash them. They carry germs and stuff like that. So you do want to make sure that you're washing them. I just hang them to dry so they don't shrink and do strange things. So that's that. The other thing that I actually don't have one because I don't ever see them anymore, is sort of it looks a little bit like this, but it's fuzzy all the way around. They have a couple different names. One of them is pad saver. There's another one that is called a shove it because you shove it in the instrument. There's a couple other ones. The thing with those is that you have to be really careful if you're going to use them. I don't usually recommend them just because people don't use them the way they're intended. The idea behind them is that you wash them frequently and then you put them in the instrument when you're finished playing. You leave it there for like 20-30 seconds and then you remove it and you keep it somewhere else other than inside the flute case. The problem is that for a lot of people, there's not a lot of places other than inside the flute to keep those. And then what happens is the moisture actually stays in the instrument and can cause some extra pad wear, extra moisture, mold, mildew, and stuff like that. So if you are going to use one of those, it's really, really important to wash them often, let them air dry really completely, and to use them and then remove them, which means that you're going to need to have another place to store it when not in use. So that's kind of it makes it a little bit more difficult to use, which is kind of why I don't use them a lot. So now, one of the things that I also wanted to touch on is that it's flute rod on the floor. It's really important that you don't keep any of these things in your case, especially if you have a student case. They don't have any room for the additional stuff. There's usually a space for a cleaning rod, but there's not room for cloths or anything like that. So one of the options I used to say before COVID was to actually just take it and tie it around the handle. Now what I would recommend is just an inexpensive dollar store pencil case, or a bag or something that you can seal up that's still going to have breathability, so it's going to be able to dry. So not a plastic one, but like a cloth bag of some kind that you can keep it in, and just like tie that to your case handle or put it in your bag. So that would be a better option now, just because we do have to be a little bit more careful with you know, germ transfer and stuff like that. We're a little bit more readily aware of that.
Okay, so as far as piccolos go, so I have a couple of things here that I just wanted to show you. First is that I personally still prefer the piccolo flags, or some people call them the piccolo wands. This style product was actually invented by Roger Holman in the early 2000s, and he still makes those himself. But then Valentino, through JL Smith and Flute World, they started making their own, and they make a lot of different kinds of things. But what's nice about these is that they come apart, so that way you can fit them in your case, but it also gives you the option of swabbing out the entire instrument while you are in rehearsal. So that way you can get rid of a lot of the moisture all the way up in here where the cork plate is, without having to take it apart and adjust your head joint position. So that's one thing that I really like about those. With the traditional swab types, where it's just the rod and the cloth, I actually grabbed a metal one just so it will show up on camera because it's kind of dark where I'm at. It's so crucial with piccolos to make sure that you get all the way up against that cork plate, just because that's where the water is going to collect. And that is one of the main things that will cause a head joint to crack from the inside out. So it's very, very important that you get the cloth all the way up against that cork plate to absorb as much moisture as you can. I actually have here, I have a body that doesn't have keys on it. It's one that I started making keys for, but then it died because it cracked. But anyway, so using a swab and a cloth, this is, you know, just one of the rods, and this is a silk type swab cloth. Actually was a bass clarinet one, but I've cut it up into piccolo sizes. With these, I wanted to show without the keys what the body looks like, sort of, so you can see exactly how tapered and how small things get here compared to the top, and that the wood down here in the bottom is really thin. So if you go in and you start twisting it and you shove it in first like this, that's probably going to get stuck and it's going to crack the instrument. So if you end up using the swab types, I actually like making sure that I drop it typically with a plastic one, but I just used a metal one because you can see it on camera, to drop it down through the body, and you see that it comes out the bottom, okay? And what that does is that allows you to pull the cloth, and the cloth will then auto-fill all the way up through the tone holes, and you can see that it's green here because that's the cloth that I have. And then you'll see that right here, where the D-sharp tone hole is, that's where the bore is at its smallest, and that's usually where it's going to get stuck. So if you pull it down like this through, you'll hit a point to where if it's too tight, you'll still have an easier time of being able to cut the swab here, take it to a technician, and get it out, because if it becomes truly stuck and you try to get it out yourself, you can cause irrevocable damage to the bore. First of all, you'll probably crack it. And second, if you end up gouging the inside of the bore, you can start having all kinds of acoustic and intonation problems that are based predominantly just because you've gouged and scratched open the bore down there. And then as far as, getting up by the cork plate on piccolos, it is kind of nice to have a thinner cloth swab like this. And then what I'll actually do is I'll kind of loop it over like this, and then I will go to the point and I'll twist it. So that way it has a little bit of heft, so that way I can put the twist inside and push that first. But with piccolos, especially if they're wood, if you're swabbing it and you meet resistance, stop. Because if you try to force anything, the wood will crack.
Let's go on to Rachel, who's going to turn us in a different direction and talk about getting those pesky fingerprints off of your flute and keeping it beautiful and tarnish-free.
Yes, okay. I'll start with the fingerprints. So a lot of flutists ask us, how should I clean my flute? And yes, you should, but probably not as gung-ho as you would like to be. I would stick, and this is coming from someone that loves to keep their flute clean. Like, I'm really compulsive about it. But try to resist the temptation when you're wiping down the instrument to get like in all these areas where it's hard to reach. Don't be a hero. That's why it's one of the reasons that it needs to go in for a COA, because we can disassemble the instrument and clean there safely. If you're trying to do it with the instrument assembled, it's very hazardous. So what I would focus on a regular basis is, I'll try to do this in reverse, it's a little difficult, is the wide open areas. And I like to focus on my directions when I'm wiping down a flute. If I'm going in a wide open area, like there's a horizontal area, I move the cloth the same way. If you go like this, first of all, you're more likely to rub the pads. Secondly, you'll eventually see marring in that direction, and it's very distracting. It's kind of like when you see swirl marks on a car and the sun hits your car's paint and you see those little like swirly things. I don't know if you have noticed that, but this is one of the ways that you can avoid that. And this is a microfiber cloth. This particular one is a Beaumont one. I can put a link in the comments. I really like it because it's not super fluffy. The super fluffy ones seem great, but they actually don't do a great job of grabbing the oils on the flute. They just kind of smear it around. So this really does a great job of cleaning. So I would just focus on the key tops, be careful on the rods, and then the wide open areas. For tarnish prevention, because I don't want you to remove it, removing tarnish should be left to a repair person, but you can slow it down or prevent it depending on what your tarnish factors are. For some people, it's skin chemistry. For some people, it's atmospheric. So when you figure out what's causing your tarnish, you can be proactive. For example, if you leave your flute out on a peg, it will get atmospheric tarnish. And if that bothers you, just keep it in the case more. If you also, when you're storing it in the case, you can also use tarnish strips, which help to neutralize sulfur compounds in the case. I'm gonna get a picture of one. Bear with me here. A lot of folks have seen these inside their flute cases. Do not use any tarnish polishes or anything like that on the flute, because it will almost certainly end up needing to go into the repair shop for repercussions. Unfortunately, I want my flute to be shiny too, but I've seen too much unnecessary grief from that. So if you're noticing a lot of tarnish or buildup in the areas that you can't reach, it's a great indicator that maybe it's time for a COA. So I think that's all I've got for just general cleaning of the exterior.
I have one like cloth that I would like to just recommend because it's not kind of in our outline. But if you are looking for, like, I don't know if I'm even on camera, but there are companies like Carol and Nussbaum that have anti-tarnish cloths that function by they squeegee the oils off the surface, but they change the pH balance and it helps prevent tarnish. Those are really excellent. Just saying.
I haven't tried one of those.
Those are great. So that's all I got.
Oh, you reminded me of one thing though that I really wanted to say. I'm so sorry.
Do it.
But when you're wiping off your flute, it really helps to wrap the cloth around your fingertip like this, because it helps to control where the cloth is going. One thing that can happen when you're wiping down your flute and trying to be extra thorough about it is you can get really close to the pads and rough up the front of the pads and cause them to need to be replaced prematurely. So if you have it wrapped around your finger, it gives you a little bit more control and helps you realize when you're getting close to the pads, instead of having it in a big clump like this and going like that's going to rub all the pads down pretty fast if you use that technique. So try this.
Adam, could you show us how to clean out your embouchure holes and how to safely clean your tenons with alcohol?
Okay, so this is my personal flute. So what I really like to do, as far as like safe ways that you can clean your embouchure holes yourself, is just get your run-of-the-mill cotton swabs. Okay. I have it here. I keep them in little eyedropper like bottles just because that's what's convenient for me in a repair shop capacity. But most of us, especially considering the pandemic related issues that we have now, we have, most everyone has either like isopropyl or rubbing alcohol or something along those lines. And, you know, some of us have vodka, you know, that, that works too, as long as it's not flavored, as long as it's like straight, like grain alcohol. What you're wanting to do is you want to get it to where it's damp, like you can squeeze it and you can get your finger wet that way, but you don't want it to be dripping, because if you get it dripping, I mean, if we're using alcohol, it's probably going to evaporate after just a couple of minutes, so you're not going to have any issues. But essentially what you want to do is, you know, on this, I'm just using a couple of drops. And see how it was dripping right there? That's too much. But basically, as long as you go in very carefully with cotton, and you can just go in and you can just very gently wipe the very front edge of the riser, and also the back edge of the riser is good. And then you can also go into the undercutting over here, and you just want to make sure that you're going very gently. And like even on mine, this is my personal one, you can already see that I already pulled a little bit of gunk off of there. And basically that's all you really want to do to clean your embouchure hole. If you're wanting to do that with a piccolo head joint, let me see, there it is. What works really well for piccolos, assuming that you do not have a nut-based allergy. If you do have a nut-based allergy, you can also use avocado oil, but I tend to use food grade sweet pressed almond oil, not roasted, not flavored, not, you know, almond and garlic, because that would be gross. But with that, essentially what you want to do, assuming that we're talking about a wood piccolo, if it's a metal one, then you can obviously use the alcohol. But with wood, you'll just want to dampen the cotton swab just enough that, you know, it's wet and kind of shiny. And you just do the same thing, and you just go in and very gently clean the inside with the cotton swab. However, almond oil, you can also use flaxseed oil, food grade, that's food grade linseed. You do not want to use boiled linseed, that's toxic. You can use walnut oil. I don't recommend sesame seed, but that probably would work. It just might taste like carry out. But with these oils, with food grade oils, they don't evaporate. So you do need to go in, and after you've kind of cleaned it a little bit, you do have to go back in and you have to dry it back out. Just so that way, you know, you don't have oil running in and then, you know, you create a mess in that regard. So for cleaning wood piccolo embouchure holes, sweet almond oil is really good for that. Walnut oil is good for that. Flaxseed is great. you know, there are lots of things. I just don't recommend things like, do not use olive oil or canola oil, things like that. Those can get messy. And if you have an allergy, avocado oil is great. For cleaning the tenons, a lot of times tenons will get stuck and rough because they're actually dirty, okay? And this is one of those things where you have to understand that technicians, our instruments are often the shoemaker's child. So even though I say never keep your instrument on a peg, mine hasn't been in its case in 4 months. It just lives on that peg back there. But you can see, actually inside my tenon, you can see the dirt. And you can also see what Rachel's talking about called atmospheric tarnish, because it has that lovely gold patina. That's just because I'm lazy and I don't put my flute away. But you can see, if you get in there, you can see those really dark marks on the silver, and that's from dirt. So the way that I like to clean that out is I will go in with isopropyl alcohol, or I technically use denatured alcohol at my bench. If something's really kind of sticky and gooey, I will use acetone. But that is not the same thing as nail polish remover. It has to actually say acetone, because who knows what's in the other stuff. But anyway, you also want to get it just to where it's damp. You squeeze it a little bit so it's wet, but you don't want it dripping and oozing. And at that point, you can just go into the sockets, and you can just kind of go around in a circular fashion, just like this. And like you can see, look at that. Okay, my flute's gross. I need to give it.
We love you anyway.
But I'm really good at my job, I promise.
It's an excellent demo. You did it on purpose so that we would have a lovely, highly visible demo.
4 months ago.
We've been planning for months.
I planned. But anyway, you can see, and my foot joint was kind of sticky going together. So you have to make sure that you get in there. And then if you look down inside the socket, see how deep down in there you see that shiny part and like a circular part? That is the seam of where the solder joint is. It's really great to make sure, I'm going to try to do this backwards, that you get all the way into that little corner in there, because a lot of times that's where the dirt is going to collect. So if you have a joint that's getting stuck, make sure to do that. It's less visible here, but same thing on the tenon. You can see that dark mark right there. And you know, you just want to go back and forth, you know, cleaning it with your cotton swab. Let it evaporate. If you get into a situation where you see dirt and you can tell that the alcohol is moving, but it's very, very slow, I would take it to a technician at that point if you have zero technical experience. But if you're a teacher and you have a student there and you're a little bit more audacious, and you see one of those little bottles of the clear key oil laying around, if you follow the same parameters of getting just the head of the cotton swab damp to where your fingers get wet, but it is not dripping, you can use the same thing with little bits of oil and then go in and clean it back out with the alcohol, because oil is a shortener. It's why it's used in baking to help things rise and have a more crumbly sort of crumb to it, you know, as compared to like something that's really stretchy in food, because it shortens the chemical bonds that tie things together. So if there's something sticky in there, or like if, you know, you put a stamp on a student's lip plate because they've got braces, you know, just the slightest little dampening of that clear key oil will also help kind of dissolve things. But you can get yourself into a lot of trouble with that stuff really fast. So I don't recommend it unless you've like had a technician show you how to do that. But stick to the alcohol or acetone if it's kind of nasty. Was that everything, or do I have more? I don't remember.
I think that was it.
Adam, how often should you do, if you're going to clean the embouchure hole of a piccolo? How often should you do that, or is it like something that I'm doing every week, or is it something that I may be doing every couple months?
Yeah, I have like really bad ADD. So for a piccolo, that is really subjective. The main thing is that if there's something with your sound that is just sounding obscure and not clear, or something's just not quite right, and you're pretty sure that the instrument is playing well, you can always just look on the inside. And typically like big weather changes will be a time, at least with wood, that, you know, I would go in and maybe clean that with almond oil. Maybe not necessarily because it's potentially dirty quite yet, but, you know, that might help at least the health of the wood in that regard. But oiling piccolos is a subject for another day and best left to a technician. But in terms of cleaning embouchure holes with piccolos, piccolos have wood grain, and that's the vascular system. It's like the blood vessels inside the wood. That also goes through your riser. So you have little open pores inside your riser, and those are more likely to collect and hold debris of what I call like people cheese. It's the gross skin buildup that people leave behind.
Man.
Yum.
With piccolos, assuming that you're going to have it serviced yearly, in which case a technician should be cleaning it when they do it, I would do maybe every like 4 to 6 months on a piccolo head joint, just to keep the wood sealed against moisture there with the oil, and to make sure that you're not getting unnecessary debris and buildup accumulating prematurely, especially if you're playing as a teacher, playing a lot of piccolo lessons, or if you are a collegiate student taking a lot of piccolo auditions, those sorts of things. It'll just help you sort of stave off the cheese.
Excellent. So I just wanted to clarify one thing before we go on, which is that sweet almond oil, that is the botanical name of that oil. It is not sweetened almond oil. Sweet almond is a plant. So we're not recommending that you do sugar. Like, it's just called sweet almond. That is the name of the
literally, I buy this stuff. I buy several of these at once. But if you are a studio teacher, you can buy this, and then I would discard it every 6 months if that's all you're using it for, because it will go rancid. And the way that you can tell it's going rancid is if you start to look through it sideways like this, and you start to like shift it back and forth, and you see little swirls in it. Or if you smell it and it smells off, then it's time to replace it. And usually you'll find it amongst like the olive oil and the truffle oils, and it's usually up high on the top shelf with like the other like fancy oils, and it's usually like $5 to $8 depending on where you're located. So
Great. It's also really important that it's food grade. So you don't want the stuff that's sold in the cosmetic section that is not labeled food grade. You're looking for something that's specifically labeled food grade. And it's because it's going right next to your face and it's pure, so it's safer. You don't want any of the ones that you might use for like soap making or something like that may not necessarily be that way.
Assembling and disassembling tenons. Adam actually demonstrated this beautifully unknowingly when he was taking his flute apart.
I like that we do it the same. That's good.
Yeah, it's good. Okay, so here we go. All right, so what you saw Adam do was he did a twisting motion, and again, like Kim was saying before, I'm going to hold my flute where there are no keys, or if I do hold a key, I'm going to push directly on the key over the hole. I'm not going to grab across the rods, and I'm going to try, especially on the foot joint. I am not going to grab these levers right here because that's going to cause problems. So when I assemble my flute, like I said, totally okay to. Wow, I really think my camera's in a different spot. It's totally okay to rest your thumb on a key that's closed. And what I'm going to do is, and again, here I'm holding my low B key. And again, not putting pressure across the rod. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to just twist it together. And I always like to twist in the same direction. So if I twist it on this way, then I keep twisting it off in that same direction. And it just really helps the tenon to stay, I don't know, a little bit smoother. And so what I do is I purposely start my foot joint kind of further back than it needs to be. And then I twist it into the place that I want. And then when I disassemble, same thing, I'm just going to keep twisting it in that same direction. Now, holding it this far apart sometimes can cause issues with, if you're not going at it perfectly straight, you can actually rock the tenon. So if you feel like you're not going to do you feel like this isn't super secure, like I said, you can totally grab across the keys, but not across the rods. So you can grab the keys, hold those down. Again, I'm holding now my C key because I want to be a little bit closer, but same thing, I'm twisting into place and I'm only grabbing, pushing on my keys, which I would push on when I'm playing anyway. So there's really no danger there. So again, to undo, I'm gonna push down the key, but not across the rod, push the key and twist. I also need to clean my tenons, Adam. When you're putting your head joint together, it's the same thing. Grab where there are no keys. There's no keys on your head joint usually. So you don't really, I do have a client who has a DZ key right there.
Oh,
cool.
yeah.
And so, you know, grab it where there's no keys, line it up the way that you like it. And same thing, when you undo it, twist it out. Okay, that's it. That's all I have for assembling.
I want to add one thing to that, because this, I learned how to do this when I was working for Carolyn Nussbaum, and it was the foot joint thing.
Cool.
And it's a trick to understanding how the grip on the foot joint itself actually works.
Okay.
So I am not a sci-fi fan, but like whichever series like does that whole thing.
That would be Star Trek.
Star Trek.
That's the one where it's like the red shirts die first, right?
Yes,
Or,
yes it is.
like,
yes. That one.
Well, anyway, you start here, okay? And what it is you start with your pinky and your ring finger, and see this distance between whatever your last key is, B or C, or unless you're like Josh Johnson and you've got like an F sharp, you know. Hi, Josh. Anyway, start with those fingers and you wrap them here. And that is where the grip has the most force and where you have your most strength for on and off. And then what works really well is wherever your thumb lands on the instrument. So on mine, it's the C, okay? And the thumb on this grip specifically is to help you steer, but you're twisting it from down here at the bottom. So that way you're not actually putting any pressure here on the steels. So that's where I got that grip from, and that was something that Carolyn taught me when I was there like a decade ago. So
it also helps save the pads too, especially if you have a contemporary style pad with a Delrin shell. It puts a lot of strain on the pad skin to be grabbing it by the pads. Felt pad's not as much of a big deal, but yeah, that's a really good clarifier.
Cool.
But yeah, it's very deceptive. It looks like you're putting your pressure here with your thumb,
Right.
But you're not. You're steering with your thumb. You're actually driving with your pinky and your ring finger from the tube itself. So that way, if you're gripping it quite right, you have like right now I've got my thumb on the C sharp, and then I have my index finger on the tube, and those are allowing me to float without gripping the steels.
Yes, thank you for that clarification. That's really important.
One other really critical clarification. Make sure that when you're putting the head joint together, you never grab the lip plate part.
Yes.
So you never want to grab here, ever. Always make sure that you're grabbing down. These are soft soldered on a lot of flutes, and you can rip the lip plate off, which is really bad.
That is really bad. I'm going to quickly talk about piccolo because yeah. So the same idea here where there's fewer places with no keys. So you're going to do your best to not grab across the rods. Same thing, rest your finger on a key if you need to, but try to do most of your grabbing, on the body. Cork grease is really important. So my cork grease, because I'm a technician, is like this giant soup container.
Ice cream bucket of cork grease. It
kind of is. I think I bought this like 6 years ago and I've still only used that much.
That's the Costco version.
Exactly. But minty fresh. Okay. So what I do is I'm just going to put a little bit on the tenon like so. And then I grab a paper towel and I wipe it off. So there's some on there, but it's not a ton. And then same thing, there's no lip plate usually on piccolos, but if you do have one. So again, I'm using kind of the backwards of the Spock grip to hold it there. And it should slide together. Now, a new piccolo, the tenon is going to be a lot harder to get on and off. So go slowly, use a little more cork grease. And do wipe it off. Like use a decent amount, but you also don't want it gunking up in there because that will make it worse over time. Anything else anybody wants to add?
I just want to show like a variation on grip that I've like split into as I've done thousands of these things. So I actually will start, I don't know if I'm on big screen or not.
I will put you on big screen. Please hold.
That's pretty piccolo.
Right, so you have like your fingering G natural, okay? And this is with the head joint off, okay? One thing, if you want to have some extra security after you've broken in a tenon cork, you know, obviously because this can cause some damage if you go too far, but you also have this space up here between the trills and the end of the tenon, okay? If I'm wanting to be very secure, if I'm worried about like tipping it a lot this way, you can actually put your fingers here like you're doing a G and then put your thumb on the wood above the trills. And then that gives you this really nice secure grip. So that way maybe the meatier part of your hand falls on the thumb. And then that way you're actually able to control it without putting a lot of force on the instrument. If you're a little bit like apprehensive about grabbing it in such a tiny place. For me, this is what falls most naturally to me, to grab it like this. But you know, this also works well, but if you're just kind of worried about that, you know, it's another way to do it. But as long as you're not putting pressure on the posts and on the seals, you're fine.
Adam, how do you get that human cheese out of the open holes?
Okay, so this
human cheese.
Yeah. So this one where
cheese, I believe was the exact phrase. Sorry.
People cheese, human cheese.
People cheese.
It depends on its location. So if it's here, I call it finger cheese.
Okay.
If it's on the lip plate and all that, I call it lip cheese. Isn't that lovely and
so delicious?
Awesome. Anyway, so this I actually do dry most of the time for most players. Cotton swab, go in from the top, and usually just a quick little twist will get it out. You don't, oh, gross.
Again, a planned demonstration from 4 months ago.
Yeah, like I have finger cheese in my own flute, okay?
Awesome.
Awesome. Now now this is not to encourage anyone, but notice that you also have those little rings around. Finger cheese tends to collect in there too, but I don't recommend players go after it. That's our job. Because yeah, because it's really
so satisfying.
I've never watched an episode of Dr. Pimple Popper, but I assume it's like our equivalent, you know? But anyway, if you cannot get it out dry, let a tech do it, just because if you start going to an open hole chimney with moisture, you can mess things up, especially if you play brands like Miyazawa and Sankyo, because those brands, and also maybe, I don't know, I'm not a Muramatsu technician, but some brands, the grommets have an extra little lip on the inside of the chimney. And if you catch that with this, you can push out your grommet and the pad will fall out. So it is important to stay kind of near the very top of the chimney. You don't want to like, you don't want to go spelunking. You want to stay kind of up close to the top, just because I know Miyazawa, I have a Miyazawa, but I converted mine to having nylon grommets. But the ones that Miyazawa puts in originally have the extra little lip. So you don't want to go spelunking. Stay near the surface. We're not scuba diving, we're snorkeling. A dry cotton swab should do it 99% of the time.
Rachel is going to talk to us now about sticky pads.
Ah, yes. Everybody hates it. Okay, sticky pads. It can be caused by a number of things, usually either weather, like humidity related. When the humidity is higher, sometimes you can get that horrible sticky sound. Other times, also related to humidity, it's after you've been playing for a while, so the instrument is humidified, and that just kind of naturally occurs on a lot of flutes. The third way is because of things that were ingested prior to playing the flute. So that's one thing that we do have a lot of control over, is you can avoid eating or drinking things other than water before you play. Or if you must, brush your teeth. I really notice a big difference when people do that. I can see it on the flutes. Their pads are in better condition and they last longer and they don't have as much stickiness. The other thing we can do is, since we do naturally humidify our instrument while we're playing it, if you're in a long rehearsal or you're just noticing that come up after you've been practicing for a while, swab it out mid session, and that will help keep that at bay. If you already have sticky pads and it's driving you nuts, I like to first start with cigarette paper and this is, I don't know, you guys could probably like specify all the really like pointers about which kind to buy. I always just buy the OCB, so I know it works and it's great. I've never had a problem, but there might be others to avoid, and I'll let folks chime in on that. But the way to use it is make sure you don't use the side, the sticky part under the pad, obviously, and place it between the pad and the tone hole, and just blot. You don't want to be, this is my personal flute, by the way, so I'm not doing this to someone else's. This dragging motion, you might be able to do that a few times here and there, but if you do that on a regular basis, it's going to eat your pads up and cost you a lot of money and a premature repad, and that makes everybody sad. So just, again, focus on just blotting, and if it's a really sticky pad, you can switch to another part of the cigarette paper and blot it again, and just kind of keep wiping until you don't get a ring of any kind of moisture on this. Another thing that people use is pad juice. I do use it from time to time. What I would say about that is you do need to let it dry. If you use it to clean the pad and then immediately start playing, you might be disappointed because it's suddenly now even more sticky because it's still wet. It doesn't dry immediately. So I would use it if you're in a situation where you can kind of let the flute sit for 5 to 10 minutes. And then that can be effective if the cause of your stickiness is foreign agents embedded in the pad skin. That's where that's helpful. Don't use powder papers. Even though they're like a magic bullet in the moment, they will cause you more problems later on because the powder just combines with the future moisture that inevitably comes into the flute, and it makes them even stickier. So I would not be tempted by that solution. Does anyone else have anything else?
I have one more thing I want to add, and I'm going to see if I have the product here just to show. I probably don't.
Oh, the graphite.
Yes, do you?
Yes.
Well,
Yes.
I have that, but because we're recommending cigarette paper. This is for teachers and band directors to know in case your school has a zero tolerance drug paraphernalia policy. Do not recommend cigarette paper to your students. Instead, I recommend approaching whatever your local band supplier is to acquire like a case worth of what's called Zonda woodwind paper. I actually don't have any here. I'm going through like my big drawer of that stuff. It literally comes in, like I have like 10 different types of cigarette paper, but it comes in the same kind of package as the OCB, but it's black and green, and instead of saying OCB, it says Zonda, and it does not have the gummed sticky stuff, and it says that it's woodwind drying paper, because if a kid pulls out their instrument in class, like out of their backpack, and the cigarette paper falls out on the floor, they can get expelled for that.
I'm so mortified to think of that. I'm sorry. Thank you.
So yeah, I recommend if your school has a zero tolerance drug paraphernalia policy, or the schools of your students do, if you're a private teacher, just approach like a band store, or a lot of the flute like companies will help you acquire it. And then what you can do is you can just like tack it onto a lesson, or have it available to your band students for like $2 a package, because you'll probably be able to get it at a discount as an educator. The gray stuff that they're talking about. If you are getting in a super duper pinch, unless
Adam, let me jump in with another paper suggestion. So we also
that's good.
Yeah, yeah.
The end papers, yeah.
Yeah, nobody's gonna give you grief for having a hairstyling product.
Also, too, these, I forgot about these. These are great. These BG pad dryers.
Yeah.
It's a
those are great.
reusable product that you can wash. So this can work much the same way. I'm just kind of used to using the cigarette paper, but and you can get these on Amazon. I think that's where I got this one.
Yeah.
So, oh, I'm sorry.
The other thing is
that
Yamaha also makes woodwind paper. Now, the only thing you have to be extremely careful of is that they do sell a powder paper and a regular paper. Please go with the regular paper. Make sure that if you're ordering it,
Yamaha stuff right here.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's also safe if you're talking about like a zero tolerance policy. The Yamaha stuff is just very important that you get the one that says that it is just paper, not a powdered paper. They change the colors all the time, so read the labels carefully.
Right. So if I can find a way to run my mouth enough to get the camera or whatever, yeah, like this one. Now this one's old, so they may have changed the packaging, but this one is just Yamaha cleaning paper, and it's these like giant sheets. I've had this since I was an undergraduate, which was over a decade ago. But there are lots of options. They don't seem to change their packaging on that kind of thing very often, though. So
I think they're green or red now.
The yellow green one was the powder one back then, and I used it, and then my technician at Miyazawa, he scolded me, and I threw it away.
Excellent.
Well, so in summary, you don't have to have drug paraphernalia to keep your pads clean.
Exactly.
That's our main message.
Adam, tell us about making sure that your head joint cork is in the right spot and sealing.
Okay, so a couple of things. First of all, I'm assuming that we all have. Am I on big screen? On my end, I'm
sorry. My minor ADD kicked in there. Here we go.
Well, I'm like chronically, and I was still looking at you, and I was like, I want to look at myself. Thank you.
Aww.
Anyway, so I'm assuming that we all have one of these. That will give you a line of reference, but whether or not it's the correct reference, we don't know if the rod did not come with the instrument. But assuming this is the rod that came with your instrument, the handle end is going to have a line. On 95+% of makers, that line should be 17.34 to 35 millimeters from the end. We're splitting hairs at that point, like less than 1,000 difference. So anyway, you just want to be able to put it in the head joint and see, is the line halfway in the middle? I know that I use a head cork push rod that I made in repair school where I put that line right where it's supposed to be. I know that various companies like JL Smith have tools available to the public, that allow you to check it, but then also be able, like this one has a hole in the back side if I have to move it and all that sort of thing. So teachers, if you're checking a lot of students' head corks, I would recommend checking out those products. I know JL Smith has them. I don't know if Farees or other like band supply stores do or not. But anyway, if we are checking if our head cork is still sealing, sealing is different than if it is still fitting properly. Two different concepts. As a player or a teacher, you will not be able to diagnose if it is fitting properly, but you can at least see, is the head cork leaking, okay? And there are two specific tests that I do to check if the head cork is leaking, not if it's fitting correctly. So the first thing that I will do is I'm not going to on camera because y'all don't want to see that, but you can lick your hand and place it over the end of the tube. And then you put your mouth over the embouchure hole and you draw suction. It's important to put moisture across here so that way in case there's a wrinkle, a crease from your hand, that it's not going to leak through that crease or that wrinkle. And what you want to do is you just want to draw suction, and it should hold a very strong suction. Now, now, if for some reason it does not hold suction, then you have to move on to step 2. And at this point, you take off your crown, okay? Now, this is a crown that actually Sarah made for me. But anyway, now you see in my head joint, you see cork there, but I actually have a giant weight there. But most of the time, you're going to see a recess, and then you're going to see the head cork down further in. At this point, if you're holding it and it leaks this way, you want to draw suction on the very end of the tube without the crown and see if it holds suction that way. If it does not hold suction that way, then it means for sure the head joint is leaking. If it holds suction from the end, but it is not holding suction this way, it means you definitely need to go to a repair shop, because it means the solder joint here at the embouchure hole and the lip plate and riser is leaking.
Happens from time to time.
And you can apply the same tests to piccolo head joints, except you have more variables that you can't check as a player. So anyway, I do that. I wet, check, draw suction here, and then I take the crown off and I draw suction from the end.
Next up, I just want to do a little PSA about if you are, the school year has started, some of us are headed back to band class, hopefully very distanced and with precautions. But I don't think it's come up on the show before, but I spent 10 years as an elementary and middle school band director. So this is something that I had a lot of experience with, is if you take a break during rehearsal, the safest place for your flute is in its case. Adults are a little bit better about this than the youngins, but not always. So I would see flutes left on music stand ledges, and like we've all had that stand, that sneaky stand that you put your music on, and you get all set, and then it goes boom and drops all of your music on the floor, right? So why would you put your flute in that possible situation? So please never, ever, ever put your flute on the ledge of a music stand. That's bad news. The other place that I see, I guess I should make myself big. The other place that I would often see flutes would be people get up, it's rehearsal break, and they put their flute on their chair and walk away and go get a drink and use the bathroom or whatever. And you don't know who's going to be coming and sitting down in that chair talking to their friend, or walking past the chair and catching the edge of the head joint and flinging it off into space. Okay, so just take your flute apart and put it in the case. If it's not in your hands, put it in the case, especially when you're in a room with other people. Now, the reason why I think that a lot of, especially younger players, don't like to do that is because they're afraid that they're going to lose the tuning spot on their head joint, because you work so hard to get that flute to play in tune, and especially if you're new to tuning, a lot of times it's a little bit scary to give up that spot that you so carefully tuned to. So I have 2 suggestions. Number 1 is, if you're allowed to have your phone in that rehearsal, pull out your phone, take a quick picture of where you are for intonation. That'll get you close enough for when you come back from break. If you're not allowed to have your phone, keep some like mini Post-it notes in your case, or like little bookmark tabs. And before you take your flute apart, what you can do is pop one of these, just rip off, a little spot, and line it up right on the edge like that. And then that way, when you take your head joint out, now when you put it back in, you'll know exactly where it was. You just line it right back up again with that paper, and voila, after the break, you're pretty much in the same spot you were when you left. Okay. Ideally, we'd all get to be really great at tuning, and we could tune on the fly and not have to worry about that. But I know that that's not the reality of a lot of people's situations. So be clever, cheat, and that's okay. It's way better for your flute to be safe. Pegs are another popular option. So if you'll go to rehearsal and you'll often see, you know, the arsenal of flutes on pegs, especially in like musical theater pits. Like it's very difficult to pack up if you're a doubler to put away your flute, your clarinet, your alto sax, your tenor, piccolo, and your alto flute before you go to break, because by the time you put them all away and then take them all out again, the break is over. So if that's the case, make sure that you try to put your pegs like in between the stand and the music chair, or like against a wall, or somewhere where it's not going to get knocked over or walked into. If you're playing outside and you have a peg, make sure that you're putting the peg on something hard and flat, like a picnic table or something, but don't just depend on the grass, because you don't know, you know, it's lumpy, it's uneven, you don't know what's going to shift. And I think, yeah, the case is really the safest place. If in doubt, put it in the case. Anything anybody want to add to that?
The only like caveat I have to that is if you're like a beginning band student, you could use 2 of the Post-it things, and you could put little lines to help you line up your head joint the same way too.
Yes. Yes.
And you could also just keep one, you know, like a little piece of tape for a little while, and, you know, just mark it and leave that there for a couple weeks while you're learning to play and set up and how you like your flute to be set up as you learn. And then that way you have 2 little indicator lines and you can just line them up. That's the only, but that was just like a brainwave I had like 5 seconds ago.
Yeah. A few of the teachers in my area, they like to put a little dot, and they'll do this at the student's first lesson, and they'll put an alignment dot, you know, on the side of the flute, like a little dot of nail polish here and a little dot of nail polish here, and then that's just there all of the time. And that's not for intonation, though. I just want to be clear. That's a rotational alignment.
There's professionals that do that. There's a lot of,
absolutely, and especially like
I actually have that on one of mine.
Yeah, if you do a lot of shows in the dark, yeah, I've seen a lot of pros that have big, huge, like, because you got to be able to see.
One creative idea I've heard about that is, and it would work especially well in like a pit orchestra situation, because like Sarah was talking, if you're a doubler and you have a lot of stuff to pack up, I was laughing because right when I stopped playing, I was doing a lot of pit orchestra flute stuff, so I was having recorders and all kinds of stuff. I had a little table I had to put away, but if you're more advanced, as in like you're comfortable, you can use, you can go to the craft store, buy a flat back rhinestone little set of like, 8 to 12 of, like $5 or $6, and E6000 is a rhinestone like a rhinestone glue, and you can glue 2 rhinestones lined up, and they'll catch the light in the dark. They'll catch the light in the dark, and they look really fabulous.
They do. I love it. So good.
Yeah, I saw the rhinestones on someone's 14K, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's a great idea.
I like that. That's awesome. Rachel, talk to us about lost motion.
Oh, okay. All right. I have 2 personal flutes that I have maladjusted for your benefit. To demonstrate this. So you get this. I had to use the first one already for another thing, so put it together. Okay. See if I can make this visible. So if you've ever noticed sometimes where you have a key that moves by itself like this, and then there's like a lag before it pushes the other key down, that's called lost motion. Is it supposed to be like that? No. Is it a crisis? Maybe. So here's how you tell. There's a few different things that can cause lost motion, and some of them are an emergency and some of them are not. So in this case, you can see this is my my A key, and it has this extra little wiggle before it presses down the key next to it. So the first thing I question is, well, does it play normally? Yeah, so that note plays. So that's good. The next thing is it really noisy? No, it really just sounds like it always does. So that I would take that as a note that something has changed. but it's not like I need to call my repair person tomorrow at 9 a.m. and tell them that I need to have this done right away. Because, you know, that's just kind of stressful. We need to save that kind of stress for actual emergencies. You know, so I wouldn't panic if you have that condition and everything else seems okay. Now, let's get my other one that I messed up. Now my other flute, I have the same key has that extra wiggle to it. Let's see how it plays. Pardon my microphone. Okay, that plays. But what I noticed is it's really noisy. And that's because this particular instance, the felt fell off of the kicker tail on this key. So is it an emergency? It depends. This would drive me nuts. I could not handle that noise. And it's also a very quick fix for a repair person to do, to put on a new felt for you. So if you have a situation where you can get it to somebody to replace that felt, by all means do. But as you can see, it's not affecting the way that the flute plays. Now, the third way that you'll notice it is here's on this D key. See a little bit of extra wiggle before it presses down. The key for the F sharp. Let's see how F sharp sounds. It sounds awesome.
That's so good.
So that's where it's time to call your repair person and see when you can get in, because that's when it's an emergency. Something's literally not working. So that's how I would pose it to players. It's actually, there's a lot of different causes for lost motion, and it's something that most people who begin learning how to work on flutes find very confusing. So that's why I'm not going into great detail on exactly what it is and what causes it, because even if you were sitting right here and I was showing you, odds are it would be like, whoa, it's kind of confusing at first, to separate the concepts between that and actual key adjustments. But as a player, if you notice it, that hopefully gives you some guidelines on whether it's time to take immediate action, or can you like let it slide until it's convenient for you to take care of.
I'm going to briefly tell you how to find a Straubinger Certified or Muramatsu Authorized technician. So if you have Straubinger pads, it is very important that you find someone who is Straubinger Certified. So important. I'm not saying that techs who aren't Straubinger Certified yet aren't good at what they do, but you do learn a lot of very specific information in the class. And having a Straubinger certification allows you access, like legal access to Straubinger pads. So if you have Straubinger pads, do try to find a Straubinger certified technician. How you find one? You go to straubingerflutes.com and you use their little technician finder, and it's by geographic location. You can find a tech anywhere in the world. Or you can pick up the phone and call them and they will tell you who's near you. They're very friendly and worth talking to.
I love the Straubingers.
We love them.
They're so great. They're just, I mean, the combination of like brilliance and kind and just amazing at what they do. Like, how many people run a global organization and there's still people you want to like hang out with?
They're
and
so
like
nice.
are humble enough that they want to hang out with you. Like, there's
Yes.
oh yeah, so good.
We're fans.
We're fans.
So
Can you
yes,
tell?
call them.
So that's how you find a Straubinger certified technician. If you have a Muramatsu flute, Muramatsu flutes have their own proprietary pad system, but actually even more than that, they are also built very differently in some ways than other flutes. Like their pivots are completely different. Just stuff that I worked on Muramatsu flutes before I was one of their authorized techs, and I did okay. Like I did good work. It was fine. But now that I have been trained, my work, it's just so much better. And again, it's not things that you would even think to ask about until you sit there in the class with Jeff and the techs from, I mean, they literally bring techs over from Japan.
So cool.
It was so fun.
to like sit there with you for like, it's
Mega
great.
awesome.
It's great. And so you can find a tech, at least for North America, by going to muramatsu-america.com. And you can find techs here on the North American side of the world. If you are living in another area of the world, then the Muramatsu company based out of Japan would probably be who you would be talking to. Their website is a little harder to navigate than the Muramatsu America website is, though. So if you're having trouble with that website and you speak English fairly well, I'm sure that if you were to call Muramatsu America, they could help you connect you with somebody in your area of the world too.
And they're super friendly too.
They are super friendly too. Yes, also some of my favorite people.
Even if you're like a student, like a younger player, don't be intimidated about calling those places. Just explain who you are and that you want to learn more about it. And they're all really super friendly. So don't feel like you can't call. They're all super approachable.
They are.
And I do just want to kind of put a little bit of emphasis on Sarah's earlier statement, you know, that just because someone is not on the list does not mean they're a bad technician.
Right.
Because two of the most brilliant technicians and makers that I've ever learned anything from, one of whom got me into this whole field to start out with, Joe B at Altus. You know, he has his own ways, but he's not on either list, and he's brilliant. And then I also learned a lot about key making from Lenny Lopatin and his square flute stuff, because he had background in Brannan. Lenny is not on either list, but both are fabulous at what they do. So that's just something I want to stress, just because, like, I know I'm not on the Muramatsu list. It's something I'm working on, but coronavirus kind of, you know, it makes it a pipe dream for now. But, you know, when I get a thing in, when I get a Muramatsu and it's me saying, hey, Sarah, Rachel, Kim, the three of you are, if I have a question, it's how can I do this well?
Right.
So it doesn't mean that just because someone is not on the list that they're a bad technician. It just means that if they are on the list, it means they have had the opportunity to learn the precepts and concepts. But on the flip side of that, just because they are on the list does not mean that they still do that work at that level anymore.
Right. That is
it just, they have had the opportunity to establish that precedent.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for clarifying that, Adam. Rachel, case fit and cleaning.
So with case fit, you might notice a lot of different ways about the case holds your flute, but you should know that the most critical thing is how much it shifts, because that's every time there's like an impact of some sort from the body shifting around or bumping around, it's shaking the keys. That's where the main trouble spot is. So with that in mind, evaluate your flute's case fit, and I know this one needs to be worked on. And again, cobbler's child. But if you can hold your case and kind of, there's just like, actually it's not as bad as I remember. There's just a little bit of flop going on in there. You could just kind of like feel the thud. That means that when you're carrying your flute along and you're, you know, running onto your, well, actually, no, we don't do that anymore. We don't run into rehearsals anymore. Well, anyways, when you're traveling with your case or setting it down even, every time it's shaking those keys because it has that extra motion that's not being absorbed by the case. And so that's, if you, you know, that accumulates over time, there's that many little shocks to your flute over the course of a year or 2 years. So if it sounds insecure in there, when your technician has it in for a COA, they will address that. But in the meantime, just be careful with it. I like to, if that's the case, also keep it like upright, you know, where the flute is oriented, not upside down or like this. It'll really help minimize the effects of that shakiness if you have it in this position, which is possible. Also, the you could pay attention to how much it's shifting from side to side. If it's really significant, then that will stress the keys as well with each motion. Now the head joint doesn't have any keys, so if there's a little bit of wiggle in the head joint, it's not a major crisis. The only thing that I would say is that sometimes if the head joint is not fitting properly, it can actually like jump out of its compartment while the case is closed. But that's not so much from this space. It's from an issue with this pad up here that holds it in place. So just be aware of that. Oh, I think, Sarah, did you add on case cleaning for me too?
I did.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, no, it's great because I don't like when there's little dust in the case on my own flutes. I'm compulsive about that also. So what you do is go to the like Staples or something and get one of those compressed air cans that they use for keyboards and just blow out the case. You can also, if you don't have that, use I don't know what my tape is, packing tape, and roll it over back on itself and just run it on the velvet like that. And that's another good way to do it without any compressed air.
With the flute not in the case.
With the flute not in the case. Okay.
Don't use compressed air on your flute while it's in the case.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Just as a clarifier.
I have two notes that I want to add to that. So if I can
pet hair one of them, because we need to talk about that.
Well, I mean, I'll talk about that. Mine will only take 30 seconds, but if you have a vacuum cleaner that has that really skinny nozzle to get into places, like I put on my shop vac, that works really well. Now, my caveat to Rachel, this is one of the things where we disagree, that the canned air from Staples, if you use that, make sure that you give the case proper time to ventilate, because a lot of those will have sort of a deterrent added to it that makes it taste bitter while it airs out, because they don't want people huffing the propellant.
I think it's been a few years since I
just
used
a whole cycle of education we're getting tonight.
But so while that is a perfectly valid thing if you use the compressed air, because like I know I've used an air compressor to blow them out in the past, if you use the canned air, let the case air out for 15-20 minutes, because you don't want to pull your instrument back out and it tastes rancid. I have never had that happen, but I have heard of instances where people have. It's less common, but just as a warning, let it air out.
So do it before you practice. So by the time you're finished practicing, it's all
exactly.
Can I add something with the vacuuming, because this happened to me actually this week?
Okay.
I use my little shop vac and that little attachment.
Yeah, I got back with the attachment.
It's great. Except for on older cases, sometimes those foam blocks in the case, they start to break down over time. And if you hit one with the vacuum, it just goes, and like all of the foam just like, it like disintegrates everywhere, and it's sticky and it's gross. And honestly though, having that happen isn't necessarily a bad thing, because it's a sign that it was going to go. So when that happens, this was, let me see if I can, oh, my flute case doesn't really have them. Let me see if this one does. Yes, okay. So this flute case has what I'm talking about. And it has these foam blocks here. It's squishy, and then like this one is squishy. So over time, as that ages, it will turn into a sticky powder, and then the glue seams can burst. And yes, so when that happens, and I think maybe Rachel was gonna maybe talk about what happens if the flute is a little bit loose, what you can do. So if one of those pops on you, feel free to vacuum all of that goo right out, like clean it out, save the velvet, because we can make you a new one, but it's much easier if we can like put a new foam thing into the existing velvet and just glue it back together, and then it's like perfect. So save that. In the meantime, you can keep your flute secure with other methods. Rachel, were you gonna say something about that?
You can talk about that. Although, like, I'm glad you brought up the foam thing, because I have had someone have their flute keys start binding because one of their blocks started deteriorating and they didn't realize what was going on. And when I went to go diagnose the issue and look with my magnifier, there were just little bits of gray stuff in between, gunked up in the keys. So that wasn't.
One thing I just want to add, just as a caveat, is if I can like get my case up on the screen.
Uno momento.
It's okay. We're running long. Okay, so this is my Miyazawa case. You see this seam here in the crease where the hinge is? Most of these French style cases, I know because I've done it before, when you take the leather off, there's actually no hardware there at all.
Mm-mm.
The whole seam itself is leather that's glued together on the outside and on the inside. So you don't have hardware there. If your case is older than maybe 7 or 8 years old, and you look at the outside of the leather and it just feels kind of ashy, it doesn't feel like healthy skin, you can actually go to the automotive maintenance area of your like big box store, Target, Walmart, whatever it is near you, and buy the stuff that they use to clean like automotive leather seats, like Armor All or the Turtle Wax and things like that, and just spritz a little bit of it on a cloth and just wipe it and let it air dry. And that'll really help hydrate the leather on the outside, and it'll help that joint and that seam and that hinge stay healthy, because I have seen some of these French cases split through here because the leather dried out.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So if you have a case of, you know, your foam block disappears, or, you know, you close your case and you go like this and you hear clunk, 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 or you go like this and you hear clunk, clunk, clunk. If you've lost something as big as a foam block, I just like to put in a piece of temporary foam, and you can cut this to whatever size or shape or whatever that you need. When you put it in your case, so say, and you can diagnose what's clunking by removing stuff. So if I take out the head joint and I take out the foot joint and I flip my case around and I hear clunk, 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 okay, well, it's definitely the body making that noise, right? So what I might do is I might take my foam and cut out a piece. Doesn't have to be pretty or exact. And then if I know that it's my body, I don't know why I'm so backwards. Okay, if I know it's my body moving around, what I might try to do is find a spot where there is no key and maybe just try there, or maybe I'll put it up here, right? Find a spot where you can safely put this foam where it's not going to be pressing down on a key, where you can just sort of close the case on it. And you shouldn't have to push very hard. If you have to push hard, cut out some, make it thinner, right? So, and then try it. And if the clunk goes away, then great. Put that piece of foam in your case every time until you can bring it to your flute tech and they can make a more permanent solution for you. If it doesn't need something as big as a piece of foam, you can use a little piece of paper towel. You could use a little piece of felt, like fabric. I mean, whatever you have, you know, that's not going to scratch your flute, or, you know, something soft that will just take up the space. So end-to-end sliding, you can either, you know, sometimes I cut a really thin piece of this and put it in there if it's a pretty big gap, or, you know, you can just fold over like a piece of paper towel a couple times and put that in there. It really just, it's, every case is different. You kind of have to do it. So once you get the body secure, then you can add in your foot joint and do the same test again and say, okay, so do I hear anything? Do I hear anything? And if the answer, ooh, actually is yes. Uh-oh. Then I know that I need to go and put a little thing in my case. And like Rachel said before, if you put the head joint in and you hear it clunking around, it's actually not that big of a deal because there aren't any keys on it. I don't mind if head joints are a little bit loose. But the other thing you want to do is, this is called your T-bar. Just grab your T-bar. I can't do this backwards. Grab your T-bar. Oh my God, my T-bar is loose. Oh, guys.
I'm sorry, that's my fault.
No, it's not. No, it's not. So this is called a T-bar for obvious reasons. So you want to, look at that. It's wiggling. Okay. So that means that my flute, oh no, look at, oh, so bad. Okay. So before I go for my rehearsal this coming weekend, I need to just glue that in place. And
See,
again,
we all prepped our stuff so that we could do
did.
efficient demos.
Just for you. We're just really busy fixing everyone else's flutes, we promise.
So true.
Totally.
So
this is very common among the pair.
oh gosh, right? Okay. Well, if everything was perfect, we'd have nothing to show. Rachel, talk to us about shipping. And Kim, I don't know which one of you wants to start.
Well, Kim, would you like to start? And then I have an instructional video to
You have the video.
support.
Okay, so I'll give
Yes.
a little bit of a, now we haven't checked ahead of time to see if the video and what I'm going to say are actually the identical thing or slightly different. So, you know, it could be fun, right? A couple really quick things for that. Actually wrote it down so I could be nice and efficient for us. Isn't that great? I ship a lot of stuff. So for me, I actually have something on my website that actually explains how to do all this because it's really, really important. One of the things that gets overlooked if you're shipping your flute is, excuse me, to make sure that you have somewhere the make, the model, and the serial number of your instrument written down somewhere on your premises. Some people do and some people don't, but do make sure you have those written down before you pack your flute away. It's important to pick a box that's going to be an appropriate size. I usually recommend something that allows for 2 inches, which is 5 centimeters, on all sides. Coincidentally for me, 5 centimeters, 2 inches tends to be about my hand sideways. So if I can stick my hand in, that's about how much space I want. And then you want to wrap the instrument up so it's nice and secure. And then use anything so it's not going to shift around. One of the things that I always recommend as well is that when you are shipping your instrument, that you let us know if you're using any accessories, any of the finger ports, thumb ports, any of that kind of stuff. But also take any other trinkets out of your case. If you have, you know, like a big plush zipper thing that could get damaged in shipping, or 27 pencils in your case, consider maybe taking those out, just because you don't want them to get like knocked around. And we certainly don't want to lose any of them by accident, because it turns out that this little tiny thing was your very favorite memento. Keep those at home. Do try to keep the tuning rod that you're using in the case, because they are slightly different. We were talking about that earlier. So I usually recommend that the tuning rods do come with the flutes and piccolos whenever possible, just so I can see what you're seeing when I'm adjusting things. So if it's off from center, I want to be able to tell you, by the way, just so you know. So it's helpful to be able to do that. I always also recommend that you put your name and contact information just on a little slip of paper and put it inside the case. If you have a soft cover, you can put it in between the soft cover and the actual flute. If you're just have like a hard shell case and you're not doing that, just a little tiny piece of paper, put it somewhere like on top of the headjoint or something where it's not going to get stuck in your keys. Just as an extra safety precaution. It's just nice to have that when you open up the instrument, you can actually see that it's right there. The other thing is double check if your technician has a preferred method of shipping. So some technicians will like to go with one company or the other. The other thing is some technicians, including myself, can, if you're really unsure of how to actually do the shipping process and how to get a label and stuff like that, I can actually issue a shipping label to my clients, and a lot of us can do that. Not everyone. It's a little bit extra work for us, but if you do need to do that, you can often get the repair tech to issue you a label or walk you through it. So Rachel, video.
Yes, so I made this video because people have a lot of anxiety about shipping flutes sometimes, and the #1 thing that I get asked is how to package it and what size box is appropriate. So I made a helpful video so that with a visual demonstration of the right box and some very like easy packing material. You don't have to use what I use necessarily, but I use what I found is just the quickest, easiest thing that really protects the flute. So let's check out the video. This is even better than the music I wanted to play, so I'll go off light. Observe the space around all sides of the case, as Kim was describing.
Looks like Vanna White.
And these are like the water-soluble peanuts, which I like because they don't kill dogs or the environment as much. And they're just easy to use. And pack them tightly, because that's what's going to really keep the food from shifting. like shaking a pillow. Last shake test. It's ready to go.
Excellent.
Actually, no, I normally add more tape on the top. I just wanted to say that.
Yes.
I got a little excited towards the end of the video. I normally would add maybe one more layer and then tape the seams on the ends as well. So, and if you don't have just the right exact box, and that I know that can be stressful because it's really strange dimensions usually to the right flute box, just get it here, and the best thing you can manage and protect it as best you can. And most flute repair technicians have flute boxes that they can send it back in. I know that, I'm pretty sure, do we all have flute boxes, or at least have?
Yeah, I have flute boxes.
Yeah.
I mean, those of us that do a lot of shipping anyways, I primarily do shipped-in work, so I have a stash of flute boxes for the way back.
I've actually created, I do so much shipping across Canada that I actually have shipping box pickup locations dispersed in Manitoba, and there's going to be a couple in other provinces as well, where people can go and they can get a flute box from designated locations, because I do that much internet or that much Canadian shipping. So, but yeah, get it to us as nicely as you can, and we'll send it back in something that you should probably keep. They all break down. The boxes all like just take the tape off, like cut the tape, and they all fold up really easily. So
Cool. I wanted to show the Brannon box, because that's another really good alternative. So make myself big.
And then when you're done, I want to talk about something that Rachel did in her video that I don't think she realized she did, but because of my background, I can explain why it's important she did what she did.
Oh, excellent.
excellent. It's cryptic and cool.
I love it. I love it. Okay, so Brannon, like the people who make the really nice flutes, they also make really nice flute boxes. Hooray! And it comes with this handy dandy sticker on the side too. So this is an extra thick cardboard box, and what I love about it is that it comes with foam on the inside that you can, lots of foam, so much foam, that you can rip out exactly the amount that you need to fit your flute, and the ends are adjustable too, so you can totally make it the exact length and width of the flute that you are shipping in particular. This box is so sturdy. This has made the trip between me and Rachel like so many times that like I periodically like rip off the archaeological layers of tape that have built up to get to the bottom so we can like start over. So it'll last. The reason why I say that is because they sell them, they're $30, I believe last time I checked, on their website, but then the shipping to get it to me in Connecticut, which is like a 2-hour drive from Boston, was $15. So this box was $45, which is a lot of money to pay for a box. However, the foam is so great, the box is so sturdy. I can attest, I mean, it's been on like countless trips on UPS.
Literally
countless. And it's still good to go. So like if you spend that money on one of these boxes, it's the last flute shipping box you will have to buy in your lifetime, most likely. So it's well worth, I mean, like $45, what is that, like a takeout dinner? Like
well, and plus you can, even if your box eventually from enough round trips becomes like dilapidated and you need to replace it, you can keep the foam and just get the same size cardboard for much less.
Exactly. So Adam, you were going to say something about Rachel's.
Yeah, so what I want to add is a caveat, because a lot of companies, myself included, say use high quality packing material, and we generally say do not use packing peanuts. And it is not because they are an inadequate cushion material, it's because people don't use them properly. So believe it or not, before I got into repair stuff and all that, I actually had a background in graphic design at a print shop that was a UPS FedEx shipping location. So I actually had to go through all the UPS and FedEx training to like legally process things and pack things and ship them in their services. So when you watch Rachel's video, and you can rewind on this video to look at it, she had about 1/3 layer of packing peanuts, and then she put the flute down on top of it. okay? So she had a solid layer of peanuts on top, and then she poured them over, and then if you look, she poured the peanuts until they heaped up enough that when you closed the lid, you had to compress it.
Yeah, that's
okay?
It has to be packed tightly.
That is the caveat with packing peanuts. You can use them all day long. I actually use them quite a lot, but it's because I know how to do them properly. But if you're in doubt, what I recommend is when you have those flaps on top, stand them straight up so that way your lid is extra tall, and fill the box until that fold or that crease is completely covered with packing peanuts. So that way when you fold in the short ends and then fold in the long sides, you have to put a lot of weight on top to compress them down. And that's how packing peanuts are engineered and designed to function as a packing product. Most people get in trouble because they don't put nearly enough of them in and things shake around. What I sort of consider a litmus test after I've moved on from that part of my career is I want to be able to compress them down and then make one sort of strap of tape across the box to keep it closed before I do the long one across. And then it is important in terms of shipping with the companies, it is actually a guide of theirs that for them to guarantee certain aspects of shipping, you have to have tape across all 6 seams. It's called a 6-tape packing or strapping method. It's been a while since I've done that. It's like 10 years or so. You have to have tape across the long seam and across both ends. 3 on the top and then flip it over, 3 on the bottom.
The one other thing I would like to add for shipping, for safety, this is a little tricky during COVID, but let's pretend that we're through this. When you do ship, make sure that you require a signature, and make sure that in Canada, we have a thing called do not safe drop. And a safe drop is when they can leave it at your designated location without actually seeing you, and porch pirates. So we have a thing in Canada called safe drop, and that's where they can just leave it. And do not safe drop quite literally means, I'm really sorry, you can't just leave it at this store, the location. You have to see a human being, and a human being has to accept it. So that's really, really important. The other thing, as a technician, we really like to know when your instrument arrives and that it's arrived safely.
Amen.
I know I know that might sound silly, but we're very attached to your instruments, and we want to make sure that they've arrived safely. And unlike Amazon, which you never think of actually calling and saying, hey, thanks for the whatever I got from Amazon, as technicians, we really do want to know that your instrument arrived safely. And that once you've had a chance to play it, we want to know that you're enjoying it, or if you have any questions. So please, if you can, touch base with us, because we worry over them until we hear about them, because it's sort of like sending a toddler on a bus and hoping they arrive there okay.
We care a lot.
The other thing is insurance, and I think what we'll deal with, the one thing I'd like to say about shipping is to make sure that if your instrument is over anything that's more than a student instrument, you really want to have specialized insurance on. We're going to talk about that in a little bit, but it is something definitely to consider that is different than your house insurance. Your house insurance does not typically cover what you think it does, and more importantly, if you ever make any money, or an organization that you play with makes any money, that's called pay for play. And that is often a voiding situation for your homeowner's insurance or your renter's insurance. So a lot of them, if you or an organization you are attached to make any money whatsoever, it can void your homeowner's insurance and coverage. So that's definitely not a situation you want to find out about when you've had something horrible happen to your instrument.
Kim, do you want to mention some insurance companies that people can get musical instrument insurance from specifically?
Yeah, the 2 main companies, there are a number of different companies. The 2 main companies I see a lot of is, the first one is Anderson, which is Anderson Group, I believe, .com. And they are a specific musical instrument company. The other one's Clarion, which is also a specific musical instrument company. It's really important, if you're with a professional symphony, you probably have insurance through them and they have a specific one, but for players specifically that aren't attached to an orchestra that may cover them, those are really important because they are specific musical instrument insurance companies. And the reason that's important is because they've developed a system that covers the instruments the way we actually use them. They cover things like shipping. They cover things that other companies wouldn't think of, like your instrument's damaged or broken or stolen, and you may need to rent something. So I'm not sure about Clarion, but Anderson actually will cover a rental instrument that is up to a really good amount. So if you're a professional player, it actually covers the rental if the instrument needs to be replaced of that instrument, and not like with the student model thing that you might get otherwise. The one thing that is really important is to be aware if you are outside of the US, and I deal with this all the time. I have all my instruments insured specifically through Anderson, and it's because they are a global company. There may be other ones as well, but there are no residency requirements for Anderson. They will cover you anywhere you live, anywhere you travel in the globe, anywhere you ship. And that's really important because there are a number of companies that do have US residency requirements, which means you physically have to live at and maintain a legal residence in the US to be able to have your insurance be valid. So if you give your cousin who lives in Wyoming's address is your address, and you have to do a claim and you live in Canada, your insurance will not be valid. So it's really important to sort of know that. The other thing that's really important is that a lot of the companies have specific rates for different levels of instruments. So if you have a student instrument, you're going, my gosh, this is going to be way too expensive. Almost all of them have tiers based on the level of instrument that you have. So it's not super, super expensive. If you have an instrument that's $1,500, the amount that you will pay for the insurance is based on the $1,500. If you have an instrument that's $60,000, then the amount you pay is based on the $60,000. So those are the two that I do. There's a couple others that are available as well. I don't know if anybody else knows, but the biggest thing is that if you go with your rent insurance or your homeowner's insurance, they often have very specific what they will cover. And the other thing is that often if you place a claim, your rider will go up on your, or your sorry, I'm trying to remember what the name of the word is, deductible. Your deductible will go up. So even if you have a special rider, there's all sorts of issues about that. It's much better to go with just a specific musical instrument company.
Great. Yeah, thank you. And just to note that, like, I don't know if you said this before, but paying for shipping insurance at the shipping carrier,
oh, right,
astronomically expensive, and don't waste your money. Like,
yes,
it's much cheaper to insure a $60,000 flute even for an entire year than it is to pay for shipping insurance on that
for one trip.
Right.
Yes, for one trip.
On top of that, if you have your instrument listed on insurance of any kind, prior to shipping, you need to know whether or not it covers insurance during shipping or not, because if you have it insured on one policy and then pay for insurance with your carrier and something goes awry and you have double insured, what ends up happening is neither company pays. That's what ends up happening, because they always say it was the responsibility of the other company to pay. So do not ever double insure your instrument.